Hey everyone, welcome to Reddistry. If you love wild Reddit stories like crazy cheating tales, spooky scary stories to fall asleep to, or just need something to relax with, you're in the right place. We've got a new Reddit stories compilation for you every week, so make sure to like, comment, and hit that subscribe button. Also, don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Let's get into it. Funeral homes aren't exactly what you think they are. The reality is that if you are reading this, then likely it's too late already. The cat's out of the bag and the human population of our entire planet is in a tailspin over the truth I've decided to share. But, just in case we survive tonight, I still feel it's time the truth is found out before this potential storm happens again. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Frederick Malvin, and I come from a long line of funeral home directors in Wisconsin. In fact, the very building I still preside over was constructed by my great-grandfather in 1922. If you think about it, you'll often notice that funeral homes are most often a family business. Let me assure you that this is in no way a coincidence or simply because the kids could never launch off from the nest. The truth is far more grave than that, pun sort of intended. Let me explain. If you've read any archaeological magazines or online articles, you've likely seen some of the strange graves that have been discovered with steel cages and locks on them, or perhaps you've seen exhumed 16th century bodies with rocks crammed into their jaws in a manner that leaves them useless if one were to suppose the being were still living. The reality is that these acts were perpetrated by those in my vocation, and for good reason. You see, most people believe that the job of those who prepare the bodies of the deceased is to simply pump them full of a formaldehyde substitute and sell the families an overpriced casket. Yes, that is generally the case on a day-to-day basis, but our true purpose dates back thousands of years. Our true calling is to protect the living from the aftermath of what death does to some beings when they pass. Those cages I mentioned earlier? They were legitimately intended to keep the dead right where they were in case the unrefined procedures that needed to take place weren't performed correctly, as was the large stones in the jaws. They say there is a little truth in all fairy tales, and I'm here to tell you that's an absolute certainty. Vampires, zombies, werewolves, and even skinwalkers are all very real. Please stick with me here as I explain as quickly as I can. These beings once walked in large numbers among the general population. In fact, many of history's darkest eras were a product of these beings wreaking havoc on certain societies. There's many theories about their origination, but as professional, all I know is that the numbers and the bloodlines of these beings have diminished as time has passed over the centuries. Many people walking around today would never know it, but they just might be the great-grandson of a bloodsucker that terrorized London in the 30s. Or, their uncle might have been responsible for the increase in bear attacks in northern states decades ago. While these beings do still fully exist and terrorize our world, their frequency and power has diminished greatly today. But unfortunately, their blood is powerful and oftentimes lies dormant in your average person. And that's where I and others of my profession come into play. We are the guards of the grave, a society whose sole purpose is to oversee and monitor the decomposition of every human that passes. Because sometimes those strong genetics break through in the process of death, and the being becomes fully converted towards that faint strain. In other words, vampires especially are a very real threat to our society, and my job is to guarantee a stake to the heart or a decapitation at the first sign of the bloodline attempting to resurface in a past individual. You ever notice the large upswing in cremations? That's by no mistake. The reality is that we've been experiencing a larger volume of these outbreaks after death, so much so to the point that a cremation eliminates a lot of sleepless nights and a low staffing that simply can't monitor all of the corpses as they settle. There was a time when our secret society had a universal record system that traced and identified the family lines that possessed these dormant genes. But the newest outbreak has defied even our records. We are now finding ourselves chasing werewolves down Main Street in the middle of the night with tungsten bullets. The silver thing is a facade. It's all about the hardness of the alloy. Because Farmer Joe, who never had a trace in his bloodline, escaped his casket before his visitation the next morning. Last week, I took a shovel to the back of the head of Mrs. Greer, who had my cousin cornered in the embalming room and was attempting to mindlessly devour him. We cannot explain this upswing. Some suspect that something in our atmosphere, or in the food we eat, or even in the prescribed medicines we take is mutating, or even adding these genetic markers to our DNA. Others suspect it's more likely that most all of these genes might truly be possessed in all humans, and these environmental factors are simply setting them off. All I know is that thousands of years of research and practice has been found useless in the last few years, as everything has been defying the odds. Another factor is the timeline. Ever notice that when great diseases or wars affect our world, that oftentimes you'll see great care taken in the mass gathering of the dead? This is because we often have 72 to 96 hours before we even see the effects of these awakenings. But in the last year alone, we've witnessed the undead rise within 24 and even 12 hours after death. To put it truthfully, we are all exhausted, understaffed, and fearful that our world will soon see another era of darkness if these beings rise amidst the populace again. This brings us to the last 2 days. On Friday evening, a young lady who had passed from an unfortunate wreck was brought in. Her ancestry showed nothing in our records, and we had experienced a high-volume decease this past week, so the special area we keep the suspected undead was completely filled. So we places her in the general cool storage area. I was in the middle of cremating a suspected this vampire this evening, Saturday, when our in-house alarm system sounded. I sealed the chamber, grabbed my 10mm pistol, and ran towards the shouts of my cousin Tim yet again. Except this time, I didn't make it in time, and what I discovered defied everything I thought I knew. The young girl was crouched over what remained of my cousin and had half transformed into a canine-like creature. Only she was still standing on 2 feet, and as she turned to look at me, she revealed the largest fangs I've ever seen. She was a hybrid. I immediately fired shots and felt that they had all found their mark, but they barely seemed to faze her as I retreated towards the steel doors to the storage area and initiated the lockdown system we had in place. I contacted my 2 remaining family members in the business and saw to it that the rest of the building was clear. That's when I heard more noises coming from that separate area we kept, the more certain genetically marked deceased. Like I said, we had an influx of deaths in our small town this week, and although I hadn't allowed one body to be unattended for more than 48 hours, as soon as I arrived in our security panic room, live footage revealed that 3 of the 5 remaining had awoken already. 2 appeared to your average flesh eaters, but the 3rd was also some type of hybrid flesh eater who also possessed fangs. I watched in horror as they fed on the other 2 corpses, with the fanged being taking a dominant stance among them and exhibiting a strength like I had never witnessed in these beings as it began ripping door after door off of the storage drawers. That's when I decided to alert the central agency of what was happening here and call for backup. It took several minutes before I finally received an answer from a nearby town guard who themselves had just battled 4 beings and was currently chasing another hybrid he claimed could fly through a rural cornfield. Within minutes after that, it became apparent on the central communication forum that countless funeral homes were under siege and over their heads. I decided the only thing left for me to do was to completely lock down the entire facility and let me father and uncle, the other 2 employees, know that they needed to look for help anywhere they could while I dealt with the inside. I still confident that I could contain the outbreak within the facility if I had enough time to strategize and pick my opportunities to dispatch these beings. All those ideas went out the door 5 minutes ago when I saw a figure approach the door in the general storage area in the form of a bear before instantly transforming back into a humanoid. There stood my cousin Tim, already awakened, and he was punching in the door code. A couple minutes later, the special storage code was entered and the door locks released, and now as I write, the doors to my panic room are being rammed over and over by several creatures I suspect. I don't believe the locks will hold much longer. Run while you can.